Good day, my name is Darcell Rahming, and today I'll be presenting to you the philosopher Paulo Freire. Freire was born on September 19, 1921 in Recife, Brazil. He was the youngest of four children to parents Joaquim and Ideltrude. He had a very happy middle-class childhood that gave him mutual respect, dialogue, and free choice. However, Freire did lose his father in 1932. His mother continued to bring him up in the Catholic religion. However, he did criticize the church and call it the church of the oppressors. His Christian upbringing influenced both his pedagogical theories and practices. Because of his Catholic religion, later in life he joined the Catholic Action. This was devoted to eliminating poverty and hunger in Brazil. Freire's education. Paulo first learned to read and write informally in the backyard under the trees, dialoguing with his mother and father. Dialoguing became an important part of his teaching method. His first school was a small private school where he studied for a year. He learned to make sentences by writing 2 or 3 words and orally using them. This oral tradition stayed with him. He was known as a great storyteller. At the age of 8, after the World Economic Depression of 1929 hit, his family became extremely poor. He entered high school at the age of 16. He went poorly dressed and so hungry that he couldn't concentrate on his studies. This experience of poverty led him to dedicate his life to trying to improve life for the poor. He began teaching the rural children of Choboto the rudiments of literacy while still in high school. He started to study law at the university in Pernambuco when he was 20 years old. He did this so he could work among the people in the slums and help them to understand their legal rights. For money, he taught Portuguese in a secondary school in Recife. He became fascinated with the language and syntax, and he found it more rewarding than law. After he graduated college, he taught the illiterate Brazilian peasants and developed a special interest in grammar, linguistics, and philology that became a part of his theory of knowing, learning, philosophy of education, and language. Freire was a family man. He believed that his family life was a source of comfort, inspiration, and learning. In 1942, he married his wife, Elsa Maria Costa, and she was also a primary school teacher. They had 5 children together, 3 of whom became educators also. Circle of Culture. In 1946, Freire began to work at the Social Service of Industry as an educational director, where he coordinated the work of the teachers with the children, while also working with the mostly illiterate families. Between 1947 and 1954, Paulo intensified his work with the adult literacy, rejecting the traditional authoritative methods of instruction and developing the circle of culture. Participants learn how to read and write words that were an important part of their lives, and thus they were motivated to learn them. After just 30 to 40 hours of meeting, about 75% of the participants could read the newspaper and write simple text. Nico. 300 rural farm workers were taught to read and write in 45 days. He was invited to set up an adult literacy system for the entire country. However, the military coup in 1964 established a dictatorship in Brazil and cancelled his allegedly subversive work. He spent 70 days on house arrest before taking his family to Chile in exile from 1964 to 1969. Still in exile in Santiago, Paulo worked for 5 years as a UNESCO consultant directing the adult literacy program. Here he wrote The Education as a Practice of Freedom and the Pedagogy of the Oppressed. In 1969, Freire was invited to Harvard University to have seminars and conferences as a visiting professor. He encountered many North American educators and scholars, including Ivan Illich, another critic of schooling in industrialized countries. Here he published most of his scholarly expositions of his theories. In 1970, he established the Institute of Cultural Action in Geneva, Switzerland, working with the various third world countries to establish literacy programs encountering the challenges of multilingualism. At age 57, he was granted amnesty and permitted to return to Brazil after 15 years of exile, accepting a position at the Pontifical Catholic University of São Paulo and the University of Campinas. He began immediately where he had left off, promoting political action that would support literacy programs for all Brazilians. During the years 1989 through 91, he served as the Secretary of Education, where he implemented adult literacy programs and worked for the democratization of education in Brazil. Freire's contribution to educational thought. He made both practical and theoretical contributions to education. He believed that real education also promotes political literacy, whereby both men and women become liberated. In his Pedagogy of the Oppressed, he outlines his method of teaching adults to read. 1. Studying the context to determine the common vocabulary and generative themes. 2. Selection of the words to use in instructions, that is, the vocabulary universe. 3. The actual literacy training in culture circle using the dialogue method. The central concepts in Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed are the concept of conscientization, the process in which means, not as a recipient, but as a knowing subject, achieve a deepening awareness, both sociocultural reality that shapes their lives and their capacity or para access to transform the reality through action upon it. Freire's philosophy of education. Freire's educational theories create a complete philosophy of education that answers the question, what is the purpose of education? What are you teaching? How are you teaching it? And to whom are you teaching it to? He does not see education for its own sake. He sees education as a political process. He labels the authoritarian educational system as the banking education, with the role of the teacher as depositing content in the minds of the learners. His education philosophy also states reality is dynamic and changing, and knowledge is dynamic and changing. He believes that human knowing is culturally and socially conditioned. For him, the quest for knowledge is a continuing one, especially since there is no absolute. Freire's method of instructions, such as the dialogue method, engage student and reduce teacher talk. Freire method is especially helpful to teachers in American schools faced with students from poverty background, with multicultural backgrounds, and diverse linguistic needs. In his letter to North American teachers, he says that a teacher must be fully cognate of the political nature of his or her practice and assume responsibility for this, realizing that addressing issues of social class, gender, and race are the task of education. Like other philosophers, Freire also believed that education is based on the theories of persons and the world. Humans are understood as beings of relationship, first to God and second to their fellow humans. They share a cultural reflect upon what they do and have freedom to do things differently. Freire writes as if the oppressed will become different people once liberated. He assumed that they will use their freedom wisely. However, experience shows that sometimes that the oppressed, once freed, at times become the oppressors of others. Some critics argue that Freire's method emphasized reflection over action without a clear conception of social change. He believes that education can only happen when the conflict between banking education, capitalism, capitalistic development, and oppression is resolved. Freire's educational principles are found in many contemporary ideas of education, such as the responsibility for education is in the hands of the pupil himself. The traditional school needs to be criticized. 3. Knowledge is the life of the local community. 4. Learning by doing. Freire spent his last years writing and speaking nationally and internationally about his ideas and works. On May 2, 1997, at age 75, Paulo Freire died of a heart attack in Rio. He left behind a legacy of commitment, love, and hope for the oppressed people throughout the world. His ideas continue to impact educators today. In closing, I will leave you with this quote. Citizenship is not obtained by chance. It is a construction that never finishes. Demands we fight for it. It demands commitment, political clarity, coherence, decisions. For this reason, a democratic education cannot be realized apart from the education of and for citizenship. Paulo Freire. The end.